Hey everybody, I am out camping here during spring break. You can see the woods behind me, and I want to talk to you today about those Civil War battles that we talked about in class. I recorded this video early just so I could have a change of pace and a change of scenery. So get your homework out in front of you and be prepared to talk about Civil War battles. So here we are talking about Civil War battles, and I want to recap some of the ones that we've talked about in class before. The first is Fort Sumter. Now remember, Fort Sumter is there in South Carolina, and that neither one of the sides, the Union or the Confederacy, wanted to start the Civil War. They didn't want to be the first ones to fire a shot. And Fort Sumter, unfortunately, was down in South Carolina in that Confederate territory, and so they felt like they had to defend their stance and started firing on Fort Sumter. Union soldiers had to abandon the fort because of all the damage that was done, and we can see some of that here. You saw these pictures in class. It's sort of shaped like a pentagon, and just was amazing that there were no casualties. If you can see here, the blue dot right there in the middle of the screen is Fort Sumter, and it was out in the middle of this area in the Charleston Harbor, and a very important place for shipping things into the country at that time. So the Confederate forces won this one, and it began the Civil War. Now remember, the important parts of this battle were that neither side wanted to start. The battle started the Civil War, and that the Union soldiers had to abandon the fort due to the damage that we see done to the fort. Now the next one I want to recap, real quick, just the star on there. Just remember that that is South Carolina. That's where that first battle was. The next one was the Battle of Bull Run, the first Battle of Bull Run. And we said about this battle that it was very brutal. It was a sort of an eye-opening experience for the Union. They realized this was going to be a long battle because of this particular incident. Now, also remember that most of the damage that was done that was really evident was, like in this picture that we saw in class today, the railroad system was just totally demolished in this area, which was crippling to this particular area around Bull Run, which Bull Run, remember, is the name of the little river that goes through there. You can see here on the map, Bull Run's over on the side, and the Union lost this one. We see Jackson there. If you see his name is in red. As we pointed out in class, he was that stone wall there that reinforced those troops and ended up winning this battle. Remember, the important points here are that it was the first major battle of the Civil War, that Stonewall Jackson earned his nickname at this battle, and that the North realized that this could be a long and difficult war because of what happened here. It was an eye-opener. Now, on the map here, you see that Bull Run is in northern Virginia, so that was a southern railroad station that was destroyed. And they already didn't have as much railroad as the North. Now, the next thing that we want to talk about is the Siege of Vicksburg. We sort of talked about this in class. Remember that Vicksburg is on the Mississippi River, and you can see here on the bottom picture, that is a modern-day picture of Vicksburg. It's a cannon overlooking the Mississippi River. And on the top part, you can see a house that's damaged, and then underneath that on the bank there is all of these little caves that were dug into the earth. Now, not only did the soldiers have to build those caves, but there were civilians that had to build these caves and live in these caves because of all of the mortar fire that was coming across from Union soldiers. It was just destroying everything, and so by building these caves, they kind of kept themselves safe. Union soldiers had sort of blocked off everything, and they were trapped in the Vicksburg area without a way to escape until they gave up. You can see here Vicksburg right on the Mississippi River that goes through there, and Grant marched his army all the way around and attacked them. It surrounded them. They had nowhere to go. They were on either side, and they ended up winning this battle. The important parts of this battle, that went on for 40 days, which is really long. The Union won this battle and gained control of the Mississippi River, which is important because that Mississippi River was used to transport a lot of goods throughout the Confederacy. And they split the Confederacy in half by winning this battle. From Louisiana and Texas and Arkansas, and that area was cut off from the rest of the Confederacy, and so it weakened them. And that's really important to remember about the siege of Vicksburg. And Vicksburg here on the map, you can see it is right there at the border of Louisiana and Mississippi. Now, the next battle that we want to talk about is the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, this was the bloodiest battle of the Civil War and also considered the turning point of the Civil War. Now, you remember how we talked about how the North had the strength of having so much of the population? That meant that they had more soldiers they could recruit for battle. Now, because of the high loss of life in this battle, the South was very crippled. They didn't have any more soldiers to bring in, whereas the North did. Now, the next couple of pictures are going to be a little gruesome, so if you're concerned about that, I just want you to close your eyes and not look, but I still want you to play the video because what I'm going to say is important. So I'm going to go ahead and flip to the next picture. It's covered, and pull off the cover here so that you can see this is the battlefield, an actual photograph of our soldiers after the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, it's a horrible picture. It's dead men laying on the field, and I want you to see this because I want you to realize that this was horrible. This is brother against brother, friend against friend, and it was really bad. It was very difficult for these men to fight in this battle. Now, another picture. This one's also a little gruesome. I'll pull this one down so you can see it. This is a sharpshooter that was on the Confederacy side that was killed. He was hiding up here. Now, if you look at the map, in just a moment I'll show you the Battle of Gettysburg, and if you look at a picture of the field, it looks flat, but there really was a high ground that the Union held. They held that high ground, and they were able to get out here and get their sharpshooters or their snipers for the Confederacy and get those men and killed them so that they could continue to fight without having them shooting them. All right, that's the end of our gruesome pictures. If your eyes were closed, you can open them back up. This road right here is an important piece of the Battle of Gettysburg. This is called, or I cannot remember the name of this road, I'll tell you in just a second, but this road runs right through the middle of our battlefield. It's a 5-foot fence on either side, and the road drops 2 feet down. It's kind of hard to see from this picture in that detail, but it's just an old road that goes through. This battlefield was cut in half by this, and Lee did not take these fences down. All the men had to climb over them. This plays a huge role in the Battle of Gettysburg because as the men had to climb over the road or over the railing to get to the road to climb over the other railing, they were sitting ducks for Union troops that had the high ground. Many of the men refused to go past this fence because they saw all their friends being shot and killed, and they said, no, if I stay on this side of the fence, then I'm okay, I'm safe. But the ones that went over, most of them were killed because of this whole situation that they had here. Here we can see it's called the Appomattox Road, and it goes right through the middle of that there, and the Cemetery Ridge is where all of our Union soldiers were, and they were able to just shoot right down there, that Appomattox Road. Their long rifle guns, all of their heavy artillery were able to kind of just pick off those men. There were a lot of people that died on the Union side as well, so it didn't completely keep the Union or the Confederate soldiers at bay, but it did play a major role in the Union victory, and so I want you to understand that. This was the bloodiest battle of the war. Remember that. These are the important points. This was also the turning point in the war because the Confederate Army lost so many men they weren't able to recoup. It's also said that the reason the Confederacy lost this battle is because of that fence in the middle of the battlefield that ran the whole length of the battlefield. And if you look here, I have the star for the Gettysburg up there in Pennsylvania. It's one of the most northern fights that happened in the Civil War. Finally, this last one, it is a battle and a major event, the surrender at Appomattox. Now, you can see this picture. This is the McLean House where the terms of surrender were written. There's several Union soldiers posing outside of this house for a photograph. This is a photograph of the inside of the house, and this was where they actually sat down and signed those terms of surrender. In this picture, we see both Grant and Lee sitting down. The terms of surrender for this situation were that all of the Confederate troops had to give up their weapons, and they were paroled and told to go home, which is very lenient. There was a battle that happened before this. Lee tried to move southward or move out of the way and escape, but the Union troops were surrounding him, and fighting started about 8 o'clock that morning, and he gave up by around 11:30 or so, and decided that it just wasn't worth the loss of life that they had, because they were going to be surrounded, and he had taken that major hit up in Gettysburg, and so he had less men to fight with than he had before. So after these terms of surrender, Grant and his men continued to fight to go and to squelch other smaller Confederate forces. We say this was the end of the Civil War. This marked the beginning of the end. Lee was, the major guy for the Confederate Army, and there were other smaller troops that gave up and surrendered one by one, and they were offered the same terms as Lee and his army were offered here at the Appomattox McLean House, which was right near the Appomattox Courthouse, which is why they call it the surrender scene at the Appomattox Courthouse. Finally, this is a picture from my trip to the Confederate Museum in Appomattox. This is a telegraph, and what it says here is that after Lee surrendered, they used the telegraph in order to kind of spread the news, and they actually sent telegraphed the news to the headquarter armies of the United States, saying General Lee surrendered the Army of Northern Virginia this afternoon, and they were able to spread the news. This was the technology of the time, and because of that, they've had lots of newspapers print this type of stuff. And you can see here, this was a northern newspaper. They were celebrating the surrender of General Lee and throwing a big party, basically at 3 o'clock, April 10th, which is the day after he surrendered. So the news spread very quickly that General Lee surrendered, and people were very happy that the war was over. Important points: after attempting to retreat south several times, Lee's army was surrounded. The surrender officially ended the Civil War, even though there was some fighting that still took place. And Lee spent almost the rest of his time where he had any sort of pull or leadership urging the South to reconcile with the North and restore the Union. Here you see a star right near where we live in Virginia, marking Appomattox on the map. And I want you to just remember a couple of more important points about events and strategies that had to do with the Civil War. First of all, the Union formed blockades that cut off supplies for the South. It caused them to not be recognized by France and England as a separate country. They weren't able to receive help from them. They weren't able to get ammunition or any kind of supplies to their troop, food even. Kept the Southern troops weak and ill-prepared. Battle locations were influenced by each other's side, trying to capture the other's capital. Now, sometimes we wonder, why did this battle happen here? But if we know where D.C. and where Richmond are, we know that those capitals are right there, and a lot of the battles happened in that area because they wanted the other's capital to be captured. And finally, the South was absolutely devastated by the war due to damage done, crops, and cities during the war. You also need to know that the Confederacy had their own money, their own, cash dollars, which I will show you in class. And after the war, those were useless. So they were crippled because of all the damage done to crops and cattle and cities, burning as especially Sherman made his way through the South. Atlanta and Richmond had sections that were burned. And Savannah, and then also because at the end of the war, the Confederate dollar was totally worthless. These men and families that were very rich during the war or right before the war lost everything. All of their money was completely worthless. So it was like having bankruptcy and losing everything. Not to mention the fact that slaves were freed, and so slavery and the economy and all of that kind of stuff just caused the South to be devastated on more than one front. We're going to talk tomorrow about African American troops in the Civil War and women in the Civil War. So I hope that you enjoyed some of this information. Remember that your assignment at this point is not only to answer the questions that are on that worksheet, but also to come up with 3 questions of your own. You pick 3 different battles or events from the Civil War that we've talked about, and I want you to write 1 question for each. I look forward to seeing what you can teach me tomorrow in class. You're welcome to do your own research on those events outside of what I've said in this video so that you can maybe bring some new information to class. So I'll see you tomorrow, and I hope you enjoyed this video and have a good evening. Bye.